Ever wonder how negotiating in a male-dominated industry changes the way women lead and succeed? Welcome to Smart Driven Women. I'm Rona Job. Here, impactful leaders and entrepreneurs come to share how they navigate their complex careers and personal lives. Our guest today is Jacqueline Post Ladha. She is a partner at Scale LLP, focusing on real estate and corporate law. She is co-founder and co-managing director at both Post Real Estate Group and Ruma Capital. Ruma is a private equity firm focusing on investments that impact housing affordability. Jackie has been honored for excellence with regard to leadership and performance, including from a congressional member and multiple federal agency leadership teams. She's also completed Leadership VA, a federally recognized program for excellence, and Jackie has served as a board member with various entities focusing on housing, social impact, and certain consumer products. Jackie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have this conversation because I feel like we've been talking about this for months now.
Same. I'm excited too. And I'm excited about your podcast. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, what an honor to have you on. Now, I'm going to start off with some rapid fire questions so our listeners can get to know you a little bit better. So I'll just kind of spit them out and immediate reaction and answers, give them right back. What city do you live in and who's in your household?
So I live in the Denver area now, but I've lived all over the U.S. My household includes my husband, my 2 children, and animals that we have adopted.
Coffee or tea in the morning?
Definitely coffee. I often get up very early to start work, so it helps for a productive day.
What's the last book you finished?
The Blue Sweater by Jacqueline Novogratz. It is a memoir by Ms. Novogratz, who founded Acumen, which focuses on poverty alleviation globally. It's a really great book.
Oh, that's interesting. I'll have to look at that. I love memoirs. One word to describe your leadership style.
Strategic.
Favorite app on your phone?
AccuFlow. I found it recently, and it combines multiple calendars in one place with task lists that you can schedule.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Podcasts or audiobooks?
Podcasts.
Who's a professional role model for you?
We are lucky in this generation to have strong women before us who have paved the way. I would say Hillary Clinton is the more recent one, but there are several others.
One cause you are passionate about?
Housing affordability.
Mountains or beach for vacation?
Both, because you can recharge in both. I live near the mountains, but miss the beach.
Best career advice you've ever received?
To embrace challenges as opportunities.
Oh, I love that. And one last question. What trend in real estate law or in housing is exciting you the most right now or is making you the most hopeful?
I think that AI is the answer that folks automatically think of when you hear a question about what is causing transformative changes across the board. But automation has been there for a long time. I think that the newer models of automation, LLMs, those sorts of things, they are helping everyday people understand how to make better decisions related to real estate investments, access to housing, other resources in society. And that is impacting both the legal side and also housing affordability to some extent in a positive way.
Yeah, we've had data in real estate for quite some time now. Only if you knew how to actually use it,
right,
how to manipulate it, so to speak, and read insights from it, can you use it? Can it be useful? But now you've got AI and you can literally ask AI with these LLM models like, hey, is this a good investment? Here are the numbers.
Absolutely. You can plug in, various investor decks and data sets and ask it to provide you a comparative analysis, and it will do it in a fraction of the time that a human will. Obviously, you have to review it, make sure that it's thorough.
Definitely very exciting. Exciting times. Exciting and scary, I will say.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see one of my children is in middle school and to see her using Chat GPT instead of Google for searching and to see the depth of information and how it learns who she is and the types of answers that she needs for utility in her life is very interesting, but it makes me wonder how these models with their inherent biases and the way that they learn, which varies by model, will change based on the user and the industry. This is all to be seen.
Yeah. Well, it's always as good as the data that you feed it and how it's trained, right?
Right.
Very nurture based when you're talking about nature versus nurture.
It's like humans.
Right. And speaking of, looking at nature versus nurture, I like to ask everybody this question. Before you started your professional career journey, did you consider yourself driven? When did it start? Do you think it's nature or nurture?
Maybe a little bit of both. When I was very young,
Yeah.
my parents were divorced when I was very young. And my mother became a single mother at a time when women really were not able to thrive in the workplace as mothers. Remote work didn't exist. Cell phones didn't exist. And, I think growing up with her and seeing her challenges and looking at the other women in my family who were very educated and very driven, but really weren't offered career opportunities, it made me want to excel, almost to do it for them because they didn't have the opportunities to for different reasons.
It sounds like you saw firsthand the possibilities. And as soon as those things started to be offered in our generation, you started to sort of like, hey, this is a moment.
I think so. It was not easy. I was lucky that I had support from my parents emotionally. But, like when I applied to go to college, nobody knew how to help me. My father went to City College and helped his family when he was younger. My grandparents on both sides, to some extent, were immigrants or their parents were. So I was really the first person who was fully able generationally to take advantage of going to college in that traditional 4-year sense and then going to law school. But I put myself through law school financially, which also impacts your life decisions and some of the things that you do or don't do in terms of your career following. So, yeah.
It sounds like it's a lot of, I'll figure it out mentality that you've had from a very young age. Do you remember a time when that wasn't a mentality for you? Has it always been there?
No, I think it's always been there. When I was really young, I wanted to be a vet. And then I realized I would have to put animals to sleep when they were sick.
Yeah.
So I immediately shifted to law, which I ended up doing. But there was one moment where the definition of success to me and really like making it and doing that for the women who preceded me was like to be the CEO of a public company. And so I was on that path for a little bit in school. And then I realized that if I did that, I would never see my kids or my family, at least not in that era. I think the world is a little bit different now. So I changed course, but I was always driven toward doing something and being able to make change and also pay my bills at the same time.
How did you or when did you make the switch, or not necessarily switch? How did you and when did you sort of start to feel this passion towards equal housing, affordable housing, accessibility to real estate? Was it through law school? Was it before law school? Was there something in your personal life where you're like, you know what, this is something that I really can make an impact in?
It was after law school. When I was in law school, I focused on international law and basically social justice issues and poverty alleviation. But just the way my brain works, I was always focused on either intangible intellectual property or real property. And I went with the real property route. Personally, my mother, because she was a single mother and had her own personal challenges in terms of supporting herself and supporting me, I was the only child with her, but with my other family, I moved in with them when I was a teenager. And so I have 2 sisters there and another mother there. And I just call them like it's my bonus family. But, I saw the difference that housing and financial instability makes because my mother always struggled with that. And I did too, being her only child. And so she always had a place to live, but it was because she was lucky enough that her father and family were able to help her when she needed it. And not everybody has those resources. So when I got out of school, I actually practiced for a little bit over a year, went into the government and focused on real estate nationwide. And I worked at the intersection of real estate and healthcare, but I was lucky enough to also work with the agency's homeless program for veterans.
Wow.
And around that time, there was a newer model in the housing world called Housing First that now is antiquated because it's been around for so long. But it was kind of this novel approach that if you can give people secure housing and wraparound services where they can have that opportunity to apply for work and have a stable environment, that they will be able to better get back on their feet and be their best selves. And that really struck me and was kind of the starting point into my housing journey.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that stability in environment is so needed. I bet a lot of folks don't even think about, just having that place to come home to every single night after you've, gone out and looked for a job, after you've gone out and gone to work or whatever it is.
It's interesting. So in 2000, housing affordability at the time, the thought was that you shouldn't allocate more than 25% of your income to housing expenses. As of the end of last year, data is showing that a typical family spends almost 40% of their income on mortgage payments for a median priced existing home. So housing affordability has decreased then in that sense by almost 100%.
With all of your knowledge, and experiences really, Jackie, and how you grew up and the environments that you've seen and the different walks of life that you've seen, especially particularly in real estate, how has that affected the way that you've raised or have been or are raising your children? And what type of outlook would you like them to have once they're sort of quote unquote fully grown and out of the house and doing their own thing?
That's a great question. I think my children are fortunate that they don't have the same blockers or challenges that I had as a child, that the women who preceded me and my family did, right? Like we have these conversations with friends in our communities where our parents were so focused in giving us a stable environment and putting food on the table. They didn't really have the time to think about that social layer of life.
Right. Or self-fulfillment or anything.
Right. They didn't worry about their yoga practice. They didn't get 100 emails weekly from school about missing assignments and events coming up. Right.
Yeah.
So with all of that, I actually recently restarted just a 10-minute guided meditation practice with my oldest daughter. And my youngest one watches us. I think she'll start with us at some point. But my goal for them is to be centered in who they are, be kind to people around them and the world around them, and engage people. And when they're a little bit older, right now in an age appropriate way, I'm teaching them to advocate for social causes and to make good decisions.
That's always hard. Make good decisions.
Yeah, that's hard. And especially with all the things parents talk about now with social media and other types of, information that's more accessible that wasn't when we were younger, it's easier for them to see other people that are making decisions that aren't so great. Like when I was younger, we had magazines and we had our communities at home, at school, and sports with volunteering. But now those communities are dramatically expanded to all of the online world, depending on what you allow your children to engage with and what they see on their friends' phones.
Right. So the way they're receiving information now and the way they're receiving kind of external stimuli and factors are so wildly different from how we used to. Nowadays, the online component is huge versus, back in the 80s, back in the 90s, there's very little of that, if any.
Agreed. It's really interesting. Our school has a leadership class for middle school kids where they talk about scenarios that might happen in life and they walk them through how they might handle them and what their options are and how to be a leader in their day-to-day life. And a lot of that is because we're all in information overload. I mean, adults have acknowledged this, but kids don't understand that this is a newer thing and they don't have a mature enough brain to filter that information adequately. They don't have the same life experience we do yet. So, in some ways, it's almost like a living social experiment. And, it's nice that we have the ability to talk about these things.
Right.
But that's why for my girls, I just try and talk through some of if they make good decisions and they're kind to people, then no matter what happens, we'll be able to figure it out.
It's hard even as a society, because if you think about the advancement, you see two parallels here, the advancement of your generational kind of situation as far as socioeconomic environments versus also that technology evolution from the last 20, 30 years. And now we're living in this sort of space, but we have an idea of how we got there to here. So we process information differently. But the kids nowadays, even Gen Z, even some millennials, don't have that exact or maybe even a similar environment, you just can't even fathom it, right? When you talk about, like, for example, and I'm sure you've had this conversation with your kids, when I talk to my kids about, standing on the shoulders of the generations before you that have put us to this place and why that has weighed on me and why it should weigh on them, they're like, okay.
Yes, absolutely. We talk about respecting your family with the way that you conduct yourself and you treat others. I think my girls get it now, but only because I've been, saying it nonstop for several years. And even then they're like, come on, nobody else has to do this. It's interesting. I am a young Gen Xer. So I grew up with just this whole other movement that, we were like, I grew up outside of New York City in the 1980s, basically, is when I was a younger child. I was out by myself walking around the city when I was under 10 years old. We didn't have cell phones. People said be home by dark. I rode the subway, things that people would get in trouble for now. And I worry that our children, our collective children in this generation, are sheltered in a way from making these decisions to be responsible for themselves. So I also try to give them that latitude to make decisions and fail at a younger age so that they learn that before they get out of the house.
Yeah, that's challenging to balance in that you want them to learn a lot of the lessons that you learned growing up, kind of the analog way, but you also don't want all of the, for lack of a better word, challenges and trauma that you may have gone through as a kid nowadays. But how do you marry that, with the making sure that they're in this stable place and thinking about A, B, and C versus kind of a survival mode, which is how a lot of us actually were able to build our coping mechanisms, or probably able to build a lot of the way we look at things.
It's very interesting, right? I'm sure chat will have all the answers for us in a year or two.
Right. I will chat GPT that after this call.
We can just download it. It is challenging though. And I would love to talk to you more about it because I especially in your area of the country, I feel like I lived in DC for a long time, and I feel like that presents unique opportunities and also unique challenges.
It does. It does. And we're not the only ones having this conversation, I should say. I feel like I hear this conversation from my neighbors a lot, even from colleagues. Like, how do you balance that? You want them to learn the grit and the hard work of what you learned growing up, but you also don't want them to have that exact environment that you grew up in. So anyway, I want to shift a little bit more towards industry topics now. You're in real estate. You're also in law. Tell me a little bit about what is it like being in real estate as an attorney, working through not just contracts, but working through also negotiation deals, right?
Yeah, I think because I've been doing it for so long, I don't really think about that question anymore. But when I first started, and, most women have these stories, right? When I first started, it was very much a male-dominated industry. Even in the public sector, I would walk into meetings where I was the only woman, sometimes the only person under a certain age. And, I took my engagement ring off before I went into these meetings. It was just like all the things. I made sure I was, very conservatively dressed. Like, you don't want to give anyone anything to think about the fact that you're a woman if it's a male room, a male environment. And I would still have guys stop talking about the basketball game the night before and then ask me about something that was overly feminine and insulting. Like, oh, I heard that, I don't know, like if someone knew I was engaged, I heard that you're engaged in front of a very formal meeting, business table, So I think a pivotal moment for me was when I learned that I had the skills and experience to be at that negotiating table and to stop caring what other people thought because I conducted myself appropriately and I worked. I think my ethos has always been, I don't know if I'm the smartest person in the room, but if I work really hard and try not to make dumb mistakes, I will be very well informed and researched, and I will have everything prepared and alternatives going into these discussions and negotiations. And if someone has a problem with me that's related to gender, then maybe that will help me in the negotiation. Yeah. I was lucky to have some really great mentors when I was younger. So one thing I learned that's really helped me with negotiations that I'll share in case anyone else is is dealing with this on their end. One piece of negotiation advice that I learned from my law school dean at the time, who had DOJ, like FBI folks and the Federal Reserve negotiation tactics. He sat me down along with my now husband, who I was in law school with, and we were going to this negotiation competition. So he wanted to give us an overview. But he basically said, go in with your desired outcome and then have a backup approach. Not necessarily what you want,
Nice.
but what the other side will allow you to walk away with. And then in between there is probably the true North Star of what you will end up leaving with. And that's why it's a negotiation, right? You're going to end up in that gray area. Mm-hmm. So go into that gray area between what you want and what you will accept and figure out where the things are that you really need to leave with that work for you or your client. Because if you figure out those, you will be more successful than most. And that's been really helpful throughout my career.
Sage advice.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of negotiations, I read something the other day about how statistically negotiation tactics that men deploy don't necessarily work for women. It actually works against women. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. And for other women for other smart-driven women listening to this podcast, what would be your specific negotiation tips that takes into account how our messaging is sometimes received, or maybe all the time received?
I love it.
I know I'm asking a lot of hard questions.
I love it. I love this podcast. I love the focus of it. These are things we don't talk about really.
Yeah.
So, not everything is a formal negotiation, right? Sometimes just navigating the workplace is an informal negotiation with your coworkers, with your bosses, and, how you manage that day to day ends up impacting your trajectory, right? So I will say there is this one moment in my career where I was lucky enough to work with some amazing women who were also smart-driven women. They were attorneys. We were in dual legal business roles. And we worked with men who could just not stop themselves from saying things they shouldn't say, and they did not care. Some of them were my internal clients. Some of them were not. Some of them were people we had to brief for decision making. So one strategy that we ended up employing that worked really well for us was, if you are in a conversation or a negotiation with someone, mostly men, sometimes it happens with women too, who say something that's just over the line, whether it's related to that person's ego more than the substance, whether they're trying to take a knock at you personally or professionally to score a point, all of the things that we kind of deal with in daily life. A lot of times now, I just will not say anything.
Just silence.
I just let it sit. And instead of responding timely with something to say to laugh it off, or a comment, or something to soften the blow, which I think is everybody's first inclination, literally, if you just let it sit until it is awkwardly silent, it makes a very solid impact, right? I could give you a few examples, and maybe those are better served over a glass of wine, or a few stories. But I've used it throughout the last 20 years that I've been working in these industries, and it served me well without having to say a word.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm going to shift to our very last question for this session here, this podcast here. This ties in your role as a leader, as a parent, your role where you are now, actually. To other smart-driven women listening to this podcast right now who are just starting out, maybe they're in their 20s or in their 30s, maybe they're even in their teens. They're hoping to become an entrepreneur at some point. They're hoping to land in these positions and function well in these positions that involve negotiating, that involves leading. What's your advice? Something you wish you had known years ago?
I have a couple of things. The first is, if you are a person who always says, I'm sorry, or apologizes, don't do it. I did it for most of my 20s and 30s, to the point where men and women I worked for would comment on it and say, please stop saying I'm sorry, because it's just like this filler that shows deference. And a lot of people do it, maybe not in younger generations, but I know in my age band, it was a very common thing. So I think that's the first thing, because it does impact your perception over time. The second is to over prepare for everything, because if you do, you can be yourself and you will excel. So, because you are always prepared. It takes off the nerves that come with trying something new in your profession. The first time you deliver a speech to a large audience or get to brief a decision in front of a senior leader in your industry, it just comes with a lot of nerves. You don't want to walk in wondering if you missed something. And once you deliver consistently, you will have that association of reliability and excellence that will carry with you throughout your career.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for the advice. Thank you for the wise words. Thank you for sharing your journey with us here today.
Thank you for having me. It's really wonderful to speak about all these things.
Jackie, again, thank you for joining us. How can folks reach out to you? How can they connect with you? How can they support the organizations or be part of the organizations that you are a part of?
Thank you, Rana. I would say there are a few things. You can always find me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to help with anyone who is, looking to engage housing affordability. One of the companies that I work with, Ruma, is opening a social impact housing fund soon. So that's very exciting. I also work with a law client, Onify, who is working to make housing more affordable. So I would say, find what you're interested in and go after it. And if you're interested in anything related to housing affordability or law, or just trying to figure out how to focus in those areas, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to be helpful however I can.
Awesome. Thank you. So as a reminder, connect with Jackie on LinkedIn and check out Ruma and Onify. We will have both of those links in our description. Thank you.
Thank you so much.